Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we delve into a subject we've dealt with many times before, but because it's an inexhaustible ocean of exploration and wisdom, nurturance, well-being, intelligence, we're going to dive into that ocean again on the deep subject of original love, which is something we all bathe in every day and something we all seek, and yet paradoxically find ourselves extraordinarily deficient in our day-to-day interactions with fellow human beings, such that we're about ready to destroy ourselves. So this paradox between the omnipresence of love and the absence of love in we humans is probably the most profound topic of exploration. Before we dive into that extraordinarily layered and rich domain, I want to update us on what's going uh, on two fronts, and first in Ukraine and then here in Washington, D.C., because I think it's very important that we keep up with unfolding events. Yesterday, we had Jeffrey Sachs talking to us about Ukraine and the emerging multipolar order. There's been a lot of commotion in the Western press about a ceasefire and whether the Russians would accept a ceasefire. And as Jeffrey Sachs, predicted, point of view, as you all know, with which I concur, there's not going to be any immediate ceasefire. And the Russians' senior officials in the Kremlin, including Vladimir Putin, in a press interview after his meeting with President Lukashenko of Belarus, and then Stephen Witkoff, the American emissary from Donald Trump, who had been on Tuesday in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, for the meetings with the Ukrainians, and then flew to Moscow, met with Putin. And by all accounts, Putin said it's a very good idea to have a ceasefire. But before we get there, we need to have a discussion about what the ceasefire is all about. I won't go into the details again, but I just want to signal the central point that I think we were making yesterday about what's going on in Ukraine. And that is that these talks are the beginning of a process that may take months at the earliest to conclude, and will emanate not out of the diplomacy of what's going on, but on the military situation on the ground. That's how wars end, with a diplomatic negotiation based on who has won and who has lost. I don't believe there are any exceptions in the history of warfare, and Ukraine will not be an exception. And so it's very important for us to understand and follow now what's happening on the ground in Ukraine, the most important aspect of which is the complete collapse and rout of the Ukrainian forces in Kursk, which took place last year, last summer, and over the fall, where the Ukrainians tried to gain access to a Russian nuclear facility, failed in that, but decided to stay in Russia. And the Russians have inexorably pushed them back. And now the small town of Suzhia has been recaptured by the Russians, and the Ukrainians are in disarray and in retreat. And in the Donbass, it's estimated that the Russians are gaining a few kilometers every day. And before long, they will probably be along the eastern banks of the Dnieper River. And it's out of this situation that whatever ceasefire, whatever peace agreement will ensue. And so we all need to take on that Donald Trump is not in charge here. Vladimir Putin is. And that's just what's true. Just like at the end of the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong had defeated the Americans decisively. It took many years. But Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger were not in charge of those negotiations. Even though Nixon was president of the United States and Henry Kissinger was Secretary of State. It was that small agrarian country in East Asia, Vietnam, that called the shots in Paris. That's how wars end. The second update, which I think is crucial for us to take in domestically in the United States, is the collapse of the Democratic opposition to the continuing resolution to keep the U.S. government solvent and funded through September, which was comprised of, can only say, vicious cuts in human and social welfare. And the Democrats were not able to defeat the continuing resolution in the House, just along a straight party vote. But they had the power to do so in the Senate because of the filibuster, because the Republicans could not muster the 60 votes. So right at this moment, when somebody could have stopped Trump, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, and the Democratic leadership collapsed. And the continuing resolution is going to move forward. As Donald Trump, impotent externally, particularly in Ukraine, is emerging as undisputed power broker in the United States. This contradiction the simultaneity of a completely new geostrategic world order in the face of the decline of the U.S. imperium and the consolidation of authoritarian control inside the United States is the fulcrum around which world politics and the future of American democracy will take shape. So I just wanted to give us this little bit of an update. I know people will have different points of view. That's always welcome here on Humanity Rising. But I want to welcome you all to the session today.